Thank you, and thank you for the kind introduction, and to my fellow panelists who I look forward to exchanging with today, as well as the Agency for Peace Building that has hosted us today to have this timely discussion. I think from the discussions this morning coming into this, I think the forum today and the conversation today on reimagining conflict prevention is timely. It's coming at a time when the globe or the world is witnessing. We're having a discussion on the reemergence of complex instability, be it in the form of the reemergence of political unrest, the rise of violent conflict, the emergence of new threats to human security from the outbreaks of the pandemic and its impact on the socioeconomic spaces, to the continued threat that we're facing that is posed by climate change. And as the thematic discussion rightly suggests, there's a need to reimagine, reinvent, and perhaps even realign the conflict prevention efforts across the globe. And this, in a sense, the way this has been crafted, it sort of explicitly implies that there's a reference, or that there's reference that needs to be made to the existing conflict prevention efforts, and try to draw the best practices from these efforts, and perhaps also lessons learned by means of the challenges that these efforts have faced in their execution. And so in the interest of time, and perhaps to create more time for interaction, I want to focus my attention or my intervention to the African continent and the African multilateral institutions, drawing lessons learned from the conflict prevention efforts employed by the African Union as the regional body, and the regional economic communities and the regional mechanisms as sub-regional bodies. The African institutions' conflict prevention efforts are dependent on effective coordination and the principles of subsidiarity and complementarity. And on the one hand, this sort of speaks to the relationship between the African Union and the regional economic communities, where, as provided for by the protocol that guides this relationship, there's an implicit understanding that the regional economic communities, due to their proximity to member states, would take the lead in certain cases. And then on the second tier of sort of partnership, then, as I've alluded to, where it relies on coordination, is the partnership with the non-governmental entities, the civil society. And so the interdependence of these institutions is seen both in the institutional, structural, and dynamic responses to conflict prevention as provided for by their strategies. I just want to highlight that the AU has long recognized the need for conflict prevention. I mean, right from the adoption of the Constitutive Act, the protocol that sort of guides and that established the Peace and Security Council, that conferred the preventive and anticipatory intervention to the AU political decision-making body, this is the PSC, to the African Peace and Security Architecture, which is the regional framework for response, or the regional security framework that focuses on creating a holistic continental response to conflict prevention. And so in the interest of time, I would focus on the African Peace and Security Architecture as an umbrella for the conflict prevention framework. And this is just to say that the AU has various normative instruments that sort of provide for responses or provide for conflict prevention interventions. But the African Peace and Security Architecture is unique in its own capacity. This regional security mechanism has 5 pillars, which sort of bring together both political and technical responses to conflict prevention. So within these 5 pillars, there's the Peace and Security Council, which I alluded to as a political decision-making body. There's a panel of the wise, which is panel of eminent persons deployed as part of the good offices of the chairperson in the preventive and mediation capacities. We have the Continental Early Warning System, the African Standby Force, and the African Union Peace Fund, which is an entirely different structure, which is supposed to create agile funding mechanisms for responses to emerging issues. And in conjunction, these 5 pillars provide for the basis of the Commission's conflict prevention responses, both in conflict prevention and conflict management. But I want to focus on this APSAF mechanism as a conflict prevention tool. And just in 2 points, I would just want to highlight what makes APSA unique, and has it worked? I think is the 2 questions perhaps I would want to answer today. And I want to note 4 provisions that I think under APSA that make it an effective conflict prevention mechanism. One is the continental and regional applicability. the APSA framework's implementation has cascaded, as I alluded to, from the continental to sub-regional level. So this the APSA framework is now employed and used by both the AU and the regional economic communities, and this in itself allows for a continent-wide approach to issues of prevention and management of conflicts. I mean, if you take an example, for example, of one of the pillars, the panel of the wise, we have the panel of the wise at a regional level, and we have them also at sub-regional level. And we see some sense of greater coordination between these panels, especially when it comes to deployment in election settings where they tend to undertake preventive diplomacy and missions. The second, I think, unique feature is the political and technical responses to conflict prevention that this regional security mechanism offers. And so, just as I alluded to, the Peace and Security Council, the panel of the Y, provide for political engagement capacity, while the continental early warning system provides technical early warning, conflict prevention, mechanisms. So, through the data gathering that is undertaken, for example, in the Situation Room, within the continental early warning system, the Commission is able to provide up-to-date, data on the continent and emerging issues, and then this sort of then informs the political decision-making structures within the Commission, especially the Peace and Security Council. The third unique pillar about this APSA framework is a shared analysis to support shared responses. And I choose my words here because I will come to the challenges. The continental early warning system is a unique mechanism. It's a conflict monitoring tool, largely mirrored actually from the EU early warning systems. And this tool assists in providing data-driven early warning analysis that is used both at a regional and sub-regional levels, but also at a national levels. So through the establishment of situation rooms, so these are the monitoring rooms, data gathering centers at the regional, sub-regional, and national level, as I said, with the support of the AU, has increased the capacity of these institutions to share analysis and as such create shared understanding of the emerging threats. And this is further reflected in the joint analysis that is undertaken by the AU and the REX, for example, with the aim of coordinating institutional responses based on their respective comparative advantage. Lastly, I would say is a structural and dynamic approaches to conflict prevention. So through what is a crucial pillar of the continental early warning system, we have the continental structural conflict prevention framework. And this is adopted to provide some guidance for the queues to both long-term conflict prevention efforts and more dynamic, so short-term responses. What are the long-term and why is it important? We keep talking about root causes to conflict prevention. If we are talking about conflict prevention from the lens of immediate response, then perhaps our responses might not be as effective and might not necessarily be as robust, but also maybe as responsive as is needed. But the longer term, or the responses to root causes of conflict, is also something that is provided for, and the African Union and the regional economic communities try to take note. And with the support of the member states, and in support of member states, try to curate solutions to respond to these challenges, but to also enhance the resilience and responses of member states. So my last point here is, and I would want to highlight, is to say, is more of a question that is often posed. Is the APSA framework effective, and does it need to be revisited, perhaps? Being one of the few, I would say, regional entities that have a security mechanism, a regional security mechanism, I would argue perhaps, yes, it is an effective mechanism. It is very difficult in this kind of setting to find a robust framework that pulls on the political and technical needs in a multilateral setting and still cuts across the various sub-regional platforms. This is a unique feature of this regional security mechanism. But yes, also it needs to be perhaps revisited, because just like all others, if we are still discussing conflict prevention at a time when we've already had all these frameworks, then it does indicate that there are gaps in responses. And what does that mean? And one I would say is, like all conflict prevention efforts and frameworks in general, the successes are hard to measure. It's hard to measure conflict prevention and prevention in general. And once it is hard to measure, then it becomes almost difficult to effectively document best practices and lessons learned. And similarly, also, I think for a regional institution, an intergovernmental regional institution, then there's the whole concept of political will as perhaps a crutch to the implementation of these frameworks, or effective implementation of these frameworks. So to have an effective response to conflict prevention, for us to reimagine conflict prevention in a setting where we have robust frameworks, where we have perhaps best practices, but also lessons learned in a sense of what did not work, then we may need to start discussing enhanced political buy-in as a means of promoting conflict prevention. So I think I would just want to leave it here and have some more, and leave some room and I think time for interaction, if I may. Thank you.
Thank you very much.